Hello and welcome to Counseling Corner, brought to you by UC Davis Student Health and Counseling Services. Each episode, we will address a new mental health and wellness topic, particularly related to the pandemic, and hopefully also useful in everyday life. I'm Dr. Karen Miller, and this week we're discussing radical acceptance. So today's topic is one that is fairly challenging for most people to really grasp and also to put into practice in their lives. I think primarily because the idea is so radical. It's in its name, right? It's really about giving up the control that we all seek, I think, in some ways, that we want to believe that we have some power over the way things will happen in our lives. And sometimes that is just not true. And oftentimes that's not true, that we really have to relinquish that power in order to live a life more fully and to live a life worth living. Radical acceptance is a critical dialectical behavioral therapy skill that is important to integrate into one's life. Being able to accept that things are just the way they are and not try to fight against that. And taking it even one step further, radical acceptance really requires us to not just accept, but to fully throw ourselves into that acceptance and really, with our mind, body, and soul, be able to accept the way that life is, the past, the present, the possible even future limitations, right? And Marsha Linehan, the creator of DBT, really hones in on that point, that we need to be able to accept that the future does have limitations, but only really realistic limitations need to be accepted. And acceptance isn't just giving in and giving up. It's really just being able to hold that we may not have the control that we want. And how can we accept that we're in the space and find the ways in which to live fully? And that's a really good and difficult point to kind of come to grips with right now, especially in this time of quarantine and isolation, that reality is what it is right now. We are living in the time of a pandemic, and we are being required to, I think the term is socially distance ourselves, though it's really kind of physically distancing ourselves. It's staying indoors, really drastically changing our routines. And there's a lot of loss around that. And we'll talk, in a future episode about that loss and that grief. And yet right now, today, all we can do is really accept the way that this is and be able to find ways to live our lives more fully in these moments. So why accept reality, right? I mean, why even try to accept the way that things are? Because rejecting reality, so the opposite of acceptance, does not change reality. Changing reality actually first requires us to accept it. And so really kind of think about that point, that changing reality first requires us to actually accept the way that things are in the moment. And so being able to kind of let go of that willfulness that I don't want it to be this way right now. I don't want to have online classes. I don't want to have to be on email. I don't want to have to, do Zoom meetings. I don't want to stay indoors all the time. Rejecting that reality is not going to change what the reality is. So, first, being able to accept that these are the limitations right now, these are the conditions by which we are living in. And now, what changes is our mindset about it. Now, what changes is the actions that we can take towards living a life more fully in this present moment. And what happens when we continue to reject reality and push against it is that pain turns into suffering. So we all live with pain. There's no getting away with not living with pain. We're human, and pain is a human condition. But rejecting reality can actually turn that pain into suffering. And refusing to accept the reality can keep us stuck in that unhappiness, the bitterness, the anger, the sadness, the shame, and all of those painful emotions that we might be feeling. We get stuck in them. We get fused to them when we can't accept reality. And again, this is a hard concept. It's a hard concept to put into practice. And it can feel like, or people can perceive that accepting reality means that we're not trying to change situations or our future actions, or we're approving of the situation. And that's not what radical acceptance is. Radical acceptance is not approval. It's not compassion. It's not love or empathy. And it's not against change. It is, however, accepting the present moment for what it is, to allow your energy to be freer to make the changes that you want to live more fully. And, there are things that can really get in the way of radical acceptance and being able to live in this way. Not having the skills for acceptance, just not knowing how to sit and deal with those painful life events. And, even having the belief that if you accept a painful life event, that you're making light of it or approving of it. And that's not what reality acceptance is. And emotions, unbearable sadness, anger, deep despair, rage, all of those really unbearable and difficult emotions can get in the way of us just accepting reality the way it is. So I want to maybe share a story from Marsha Linehan's actual materials. And I just want to give a bit of a trigger warning right now, because this is a challenging story and may elicit a lot of reactions for you to think about how, radical acceptance is in this the story point. Please know, if you are triggered by this story, we are offering telehealth services as well as crisis services. I've listed both our registration number and the Yolo County Suicide Prevention line here. And I also hope that the story will help kind of illuminate what radical acceptance really can look like in even the most painful moments. A man is in prison with a life sentence for a crime he did not commit. He has used up his appeals, has no money or resources to hire a lawyer, and cannot get the Innocence Project to take up his cause. Accepting that prison is his home for the time being is critical. Without such reality acceptance, the prisoner might not adapt to prison, learn the skills necessary to survive in prison, and get whatever good things he can have while in prison. Tantrums And fighting the system can interfere with problem solving within the system and lead to more punishment. Lying down on his cot and giving up and giving in can be just as problematic for this man and can also lead to punishment and recriminations. So maybe just take a minute and sit with your thoughts around that story. I think for me, it's hard to think of ways in such a challenging situation that you can really live a life worth living. And yet, accepting reality and accepting the current situation, in this story, this person may be able to live a life that has happy moments, that has laughter, that has joy, even during a really challenging and difficult period of the person's life. And while the pandemic is maybe not as extreme as the story point, it's a very challenging situation and actually can be fairly extreme for some of you. Home may not be a safe or comfortable place for you. Finances may be really a struggle right now. You know, the idea of having to be online and do this work and maybe limited resources and access to technology. And even just the major life shift and transition that this was put all of us in, no matter what our different life circumstances are, we are all collectively feeling this huge life shift and huge transition and pain during this quarantine, during the pandemic. And so to really be able to sit with not rejecting that this is the way in which we are living our lives right now and the way in which we need to operate. Being able to accept that reality and find moments, find ways to live our lives more fully right now will be so important for you to not just survive, but to really thrive in your life during these painful times. I want to thank you all for your time today, and I hope this was a helpful bit about radical acceptance. I want to share some resources for you and really encourage you to check out some of the mindfulness resources I have put up on the page here. There are some great guided meditations and imagery and about radical acceptance, and you can find more information about Marsha Linehan's work, and also Tara Brock is doing some great work on radical acceptance as well, so I've included her links here. So I hope you all can find ways to really practice radical acceptance in your life. Until we talk again, this is Dr. Karen Miller, wishing you hope, health, and happiness. Stay Aggie strong.